Let's get to my panel. Liberal MP Gillian Simmons from the Labor Party, Josh Burns. Gentlemen, thanks both for your time. We've got to start on the vaccine. No timeline, Gillian Simmons. There was one previously for October for a few hours. It was the end of the year. Now there's none. How is that acceptable?
Well, I think the timeline is as soon as possible. We want to get vaccinations into Australians, but we've shown that throughout the pandemic we can be very nimble because during the pandemic things will change. And that's exactly what we're doing in relation to the vaccine. People can be confident in the fact that because of our existing management of COVID, there's no community transmission. So we have the ability to take the time to look at the medical evidence and follow the medical evidence as we always have. Some of these other nations, like UK, are in a much different situation.
Call it nimble, but you've cancelled your own timeline. There's nothing to mark the government on anymore. So if you get it done by June next year, you'll say, yeah, that was a good effort. If you get it done by January next year, you'll say it was a good effort. Don't you get the need to say when, even if it's not a hard and fast date, to set something here?
But our ambition is to get it done as soon as possible. And it's a global pandemic, Tom, right? There will be supply issues. That's why we've invested in local manufacturing. There will be new health advice because it's a new vaccine. But overwhelmingly, these vaccines are incredibly effective, incredibly safe.
All those
we want to
elements
roll
you
them out as
just
soon as
mentioned
possible.
Different developments. What will be happening as well around the world? Other countries in the position they're in. Which one of them didn't exist before when you did have a timeline?
Well, we've seen new health advice just in the last week, which has led to us purchasing more Pfizer vaccines rather than the locally produced AstraZeneca vaccine. So, and with the global pandemic, obviously supply chain issues out of Europe because they're in a lot worse situation
Pfizer will be fine and on
than us.
time, and that's going to fill the gap. You still can't give a timeline.
Well, no, what we're saying is we want to do it as soon as possible. That's the right timeline. That's what Australians expect, right? They want to see it as soon as possible. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
We're going to possible isn't a timeline, is it?
Well, I think it is, because I think what we're trying to say to Australians is these vaccines are very safe, they're very effective, and if you're offered one, then you should be taking it up, and we're going to get it in the hands of GPs as soon as possible.
Josh Burns, AstraZeneca has turned out to be a problem. It's a very rare one. There's a lot of caution from authorities, and that's why this timeline, or lack thereof one now, is not being used. It wasn't possible to know beforehand, was it, that this was, before this was selected as a locally made vaccine, that this would have this particular clotting issue?
Tom, this vaccine rollout has been a shambolic embarrassment for this country, for this government and for this Prime Minister. Now, obviously no one could foresee the 1 in 400,000 blood clot issue when you only do phase 3 trials for around 24,000 people, obviously, but the government knew that they needed to have contingency plans in case something went wrong. And that's why last year the Labor Party was saying, do a deal with Moderna. Go out there and make sure that we have enough vaccines that in case something goes wrong. Now, we actually had pre-warning of something going wrong when the University of Queensland vaccine fell through, and instead of then diversifying our vaccine products in Australia, the federal government bunkered down on AstraZeneca. This is a problem of the federal government's own making.
Let me jump in there.
When the UK...
So Moderna, it's got its own issues right now with supply. Would Moderna be helping us right now?
Well, Moderna is going to be making 1 billion vaccines every year over the next few years. And the federal government hasn't engaged with Moderna. They have said themselves that they preferred the Pfizer as the mRNA option, and they haven't sought to do a deal with Moderna.
Do you know that? They haven't engaged with Moderna?
I have asked the federal government directly in briefings to the Labor Party about why they haven't sought to get Moderna vaccines in Australia, and their answer was that the preferred option was the Pfizer of the mRNA, and then they wanted to diversify and then go to all the usual lines about supply in AstraZeneca. The point is this, Tom, that this rollout is going to hurt the economy. There are parts of the economy that are recovering, which is brilliant, right? It's brilliant. But there are other parts of the economy that rely on Australia's engagement with the international world. The most obvious examples is tourism, universities, and events as well. Without this vaccine rollout, without a timeline, we are unable to have a timeline for those businesses to recover. We're unable to have a timeline for Australia's economy to be standing on its own two feet.
Let me just jump
Morrison,
in one more point on this, though. So AstraZeneca clearly is a big element of this. The government could only pick one locally made vaccine. Correct me if I'm wrong there, when it decided on its rollout. So isn't a big part of AstraZeneca where we are right now, that element of it, that element of the hiccup, is down to bad luck?
Well, it's not bad luck that aged care homes haven't been vaccinated yet. It's not bad luck that there hasn't been disability centres not been vaccinated yet. The federal government set its own target of 4 million vaccinations by April, and that was before there was changed advice on AstraZeneca. Hang on, Julian, let me finish. Let me finish.
Hang on.
Sorry,
what would
let me
Labor
finish.
have done differently?
Julian,
right?
let me finish. Julian, let me finish. This was before the AstraZeneca advice was changed by the medical authorities. Now, obviously, we would take the advice of the medical authorities. It's really serious advice. But the government's own targets of vaccinating 4 million Australians by March, or by the end of March, was completely thrown out the window. That they missed it by 3.4 million doses. This isn't a result of AstraZeneca having changed medical advice. This is a result of Scott Morrison and Greg Hunt promising to vaccinate Australians, and they've failed to do so. And it's going to hurt the economy, it's going to hurt businesses, it's going to hurt sustainability of our recovery, and it's going to hurt Australians.
Tom, I've sat on this show with Labor counterparts, albeit not Josh, back in January when the Labor Party were calling on us to just start vaccinating before even the TGA had rolled out its medical assessment of it. And I think the point that, I don't think that's what Australians want. Australians don't want us rushed into this for the sake of it, for the sake of meeting an arbitrary timeline. They want us to follow the medical advice as we have always done, and make sure this is rolled out in a very considered way with these vaccines. And I just don't think what Josh is doing, which is undermining the confidence that people can have in the vaccine without any solutions, without any other political solutions, saying what Labor would do differently, is helpful.
Trying for this part of a week to try to get firm numbers on how many vaccines we had in the country, how many were ready to go, and it was an impossible task, though, Julian. It hasn't been clearly explained. To go to one part, aged care workers and aged care residents and their vaccinations, fewer than half of them have been vaccinated this far into the rollout.
Well, we've vaccinated, over 1 million vaccinations have already been distributed. So it is happening now for those frontline workers. And it's going to continue, right? But again, it's dependent on supply. And in terms of, you're talking about getting the numbers as they're rolling into the country. Well, there's a tactical reason for not revealing exactly when the vaccines are turning up in country, because then they can be, then that supply chain can change.
What do you mean? You can't say the numbers of how many are in Australia? Why not?
Well, there's a supply chain to get the vaccine into the country, isn't it? And it has to transit through other certain countries who perhaps are not as in a good position as us, and they may take the opportunity to secure the vaccine for themselves. So
we're not saying
we announce it when they arrive in country
or here. Yeah. We're just saying how many are in the country. Yeah, there's no technical reason not to tell the Australian people or journalists.
Well, and what we do is, as soon as it hits country, that's when it's demonstrated to Australians how many we're bringing into the country and how many have actually landed.
What hasn't been that clear, I'm afraid, so far.
Well, there is numbers. There is numbers that is being. Yeah, it's very clear in terms of, because we've shown that we've already rolled out over.
I'm just going to ask you that one more time, though. Just on AstraZeneca, Josh Burns, do you admit there's an element of bad luck here for the government on AstraZeneca and this clotting issue?
Of course, it's not ideal, Tom. Of course, it's not ideal that a major part of the Australia's vaccine rollout is not the preferred vaccine for under 50s. But that doesn't mean that the government can walk away from its commitments. It doesn't mean that the government should be walking away. This is too important to sort of throw your hands in the air and give up like what Scott Morrison's done. And I just need to say, because Julian verballed the Labor Party before, we weren't saying roll out vaccines before they're approved. What we were saying in January was that the approval of the Pfizer vaccine was likely to happen in January. Therefore, get vaccines ready so that when it is approved, vaccines can go into people's arms. And instead of being ready, we have to wait until March until vaccines.
Let me ask you this finally.
No,
nearly
ridiculous.
done. How do you both feel about getting the AstraZeneca jab yourselves right now? Josh, you first.
No, it is the preferred medical advice to get the Pfizer vaccine, and it's not to be undermined, that advice. That's really serious advice. The issue is with the clotting is that there are young
but it's
people
also with
can
the
die from
situation
this.
gets worse if that advice is so. It's a no from you, I think,
Well,
Julian. We're nearly out of time.
My view is to follow the medical advice, but again, even the AstraZeneca vaccine is very effective, very safe. The blood clotting risk is very small. So my advice to Australians is if they're offered the vaccine by their GP, to get it, whether that be Pfizer or AstraZeneca.
So hang on, you're saying Australians should get it if they're offered it, even if they're under 50?
No, I'm saying if they're offered it by their GP, and their GP will follow the advice of the Principal Health Committee, which is AstraZeneca for people over 50.
We're going to have to go. Julian, Josh, talk